So the Windrush generation refers to people who came to the UK from Caribbean countries between 1948 and 1973. These are Commonwealth citizens who were encouraged to settle, live and work here with the right to remain indefinitely. Now, it's almost a year since we started to hear stories of some of those who'd been told they were living here illegally and threatened with deportation because they didn't have official paperwork. So there were changes to immigration law in 2012, which said that if you wanted to work here, live here, or if you wanted to access healthcare, then you had to have official documents. But it transpired that the Home Office didn't keep a record of those who had been granted leave to remain, and that they later destroyed landing cards from Windrush migrants. So eventually the government had to apologise to those affected.
What is happening today, Colleen?
So today we're expecting an announcement from the Home Secretary about details of the Windrush compensation scheme. Theresa May a year ago said that this was a commitment to resolve the anxieties and problems that some of them had suffered. Now, it's been reported that the Chancellor has agreed £100 million, but it's suggested and we could be looking at double that figure, and that around 15,000 people could be eligible. But as I say, we'll hear full details of that later today.
And briefly, the controversy today that you found out about?
Yes, so we know there's an official Windrush engagement event hosted at the Houses of Parliament today, where around a dozen people have been invited, half of those affected by the Windrush problems. A number of them say they had been invited, then effectively uninvited, which has caused a lot of upset considering the sensitivities around this. One of them, who I spoke to yesterday, said the Home Secretary was a coward hiding in his ivory tower.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Thank you. Right, let's talk to Jacqueline McKenzie, who's an immigration lawyer who's been working with Windrush victims. She was asked to nominate 6 people to attend the compensation event today, the reception, but then had to turn 3 of them down after the Home Office selection. She says they are livid and they're not being treated seriously. Glenda Caesar has been invited to the event and is going, and Willow Sims was one of the 6 not invited. And Willow, hello. Are you disappointed? How disappointed? How angry?
I am. I'm really disappointed and I'm really upset because I was hoping that this would be a chance for me to put it all behind me and actually start building my life back up again. And I wanted to hear what they had to say. How has this happened? How can it be avoided? How will this not happen in a decade time?
Right. Do you think you weren't invited because you were going to ask those questions face to face?
I think it's worrying that it was so secretive a meeting, that we couldn't be given dates and times,
right,
and that suddenly they've chosen to not invite half of the people that were invited. And I can only think that maybe he's worried that someone is going to stand up and eloquently ask what the problem has been and how their compensation is going to make up for all the lives that have been ruined. People have died because of this, over something really silly. It's paperwork.
Yeah.
I know we're switching to digital, but people shouldn't have to die to show that they've been in the country and contributed. I love my country.
Glenda, let me ask you, you came here in the early 60s, you were 6 months old, you from Dominica, and as an adult woman left the country, and a couple of times as you came back people were stopping you and saying, look, you need a visa, this needs to be sorted. Eventually you applied for a British passport and were told you couldn't have one. Why?
I was told that I wasn't British because there was no documentation for them to find to say I was British. Or many times it would be they haven't got anything, my mum, and then they couldn't find anything on my dad. So I remember being stopped at the airport and I basically said to the immigration officer, if you find anything on my dad, you're doing me a favour because it might help me. But when he came back and he said, we can't find anything, but we're giving you a warning. If you leave this country, you won't be able to come back in again. So
and you had to show them your NHS ID. You worked for the NHS,
I worked for
didn't
the
you?
NHS. It's a good thing I had. I was in a good position where I could show them.
Sorry to interrupt, Glenda. Eventually, you lost a job as working at a doctor's surgery.
I did,
because you didn't have a passport.
That's
and you've got
right.
the letter. You showed. You haven't brought it in with you, but
sorry,
don't worry. But it said, I'm sorry, you can't work for us anymore because you don't have a British passport.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
That was 2009. What impact did that have on you?
It had a lot of impact on me. You know, I was lost. I couldn't claim benefits. I couldn't work. And I had got to the stage like last year before this blew up that I had gone to the doctor and basically said to them that I just want to close, I just want to close my eyes, I just want to take tablets and go to sleep. And that's the way that I felt. And you know, then the doctor recommended counselling, but what can counselling do when you still got this over you? How are you going to deal with it? It breaks you down. And you know, this all coming up now, you feel as if, but I was saying all of this before, why didn't you listen to me?
Can I ask both of you then, before I bring Jacqueline in terms of compensation, what, I know you spent something like £3,500 trying to apply for this and apply for that over the years. What would be adequate for you, bearing in mind loss of earnings?
Yeah, well, validate my loss of earnings, validate the emotional stress that I've had to go through. That's what I'm asking for, you know, not millions, but look at what I was earning, and loss of my pension, 10 years of my pension I lost as well. So validate that and be happy.
What would you say?
I would actually agree with that. I think I'm doing a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because half of me doesn't care about the money. I really just want to not feel like a criminal. I want to be able to get a job again without having to beg people, to phone people so I can get in. So a part of me, it's not about the money.
Of course.
And then the other part of me that sees my children struggling and can't pay the rent and is having to borrow money from friends and family says I need to at least recoup what I've lost.
Jacqueline, it's so clear from Willow and Glenda that the impact of this monumental mess up from the Home Office is still being felt.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm working with a couple of hundred people who are affected by the WINDRUSH scandal, and we're seeing daily people are still destitute. Just yesterday I was dealing with a client who's living in a caravan on his sister's drive. There are still people who are still waiting for status documents from the task force. We know that the hardship funds hardly paid out anything to anyone, and we're sitting waiting to hear what the compensation scheme is going to be.
Yeah. And briefly, this row over who's going to the event later, I mean, what do you say about that?
Well, I think that's quite shocking. I think my own invitations got lost in the post. And but the point about that, I mean, I really want to focus more on the compensation and how badly people have been treated. But I think there is an issue, and it's this. We were told to nominate people who'd been affected by the WINDRUSH scandal for invitations. The email clearly says, and I did send the email on to your office yesterday, it clearly says it's an invitation. And then I started hearing from people that they'd got an invitation, so I rang the people that I'd nominated, only to find that they hadn't, or that only 2 had out of 6 people. And it became very obvious to me from speaking to people at the Home Office that they'd just clearly decided either we weren't going to bother with them, or it was they had been uninvited, effectively. And what's happening today is an event. It's a reception, and there'll be drinks and canapes, and there'll be sort of the black bourgeoisie, as I call them, the glitterati, will all be there. But it isn't an attempt. This really should have been an event that was about discussing this seriously. People who work with the Windrushers should be there. People who are affected by the scandal, like these 2 ladies, I know Glenda was going. Willow almost certainly should have been there. And it tells me that 1 year on from the scandal, that nothing's been learnt, but worse, this group continue to be treated with contempt.
I would agree with that. Sanjay Javid, actually, because of my Member of Parliament, who's amazing, she's a really lovely lady, and because she's been campaigning with me to get recognised, Sanjay Javid actually apologised to me in Parliament, but he got my name wrong. I thought, it's all right. I wrote him a letter trying to ask him to listen to my case, and he gave it to somebody else, and somebody else read it and wrote me a letter back. And for me, it would have just been acknowledgement that I was trying to be noticed. And,
Willow, I'm going to stop you there.
Someone had.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but thank you. I really appreciate you all coming on the programme. Thank you very much. Have a good day. BBC Newsroom Live. Oops, there you are. Have a good day. BBC Newsroom Live is next.